It was one of those afternoons that just felt perfect. The sun was warm but not oppressive, the breeze soft enough to lift my hair as I walked to the car. I had packed Robert's favorite lunch, lemon herb chicken with roasted potatoes, the one I only made when I wanted to spoil him. He'd been so tense lately, always complaining about deadlines and endless meetings. I thought maybe this would help him breathe, maybe even make him laugh. On the drive over, I rehearsed what I'd say when I handed him the bag. Something playful, something that reminded him I was on his side. When I walked into the lobby, the air hit me, overly cold, sterile, smelling faintly of disinfectant and copier ink. I spotted the receptionist, a woman I'd seen before at a Christmas party. "Hi," I smiled, holding up the bag like a peace offering. "I'm just here to drop off lunch for Robert." She looked at me, not with the friendly recognition I expected, but with a strange, uneasy hesitation. Her eyebrows furrowed. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Robert hasn't worked here for months. He resigned. Didn't he tell you?" For a moment, I swear my ears were ringing. Months? Resigned? My face stayed still. I nodded, forced a polite, "Thank you," and turned away as if nothing had happened. But once I got to my car, I just sat there, gripping the lunch bag like it was an anchor. My fingers were trembling. I stared straight ahead, unable to process what I'd just heard. It felt like someone had slid a crack right through the middle of my world, and I could already feel it widening. I kept thinking maybe the receptionist had made a mistake. Maybe there was another Robert. Maybe she was new and didn't know what she was talking about. But the certainty in her voice, it was like she'd just handed me a truth I never asked for. I stared at the building through the windshield, half expecting him to walk out any second, briefcase in hand, giving me that crooked smile he wore when he saw me unexpectedly. But the door stayed shut. My chest felt tight, as if my ribs had been pulled in with a drawstring. I thought about the mornings, him tying his tie in the mirror, kissing me quickly before heading out. I thought about all those late nights he'd explained away with just wrapping up a project, or traffic was a nightmare. All those times I'd defended him when friends hinted that he seemed distant. My mind started running backward, piecing together scraps I'd ignored. The cash withdrawals, the missed calls, the new cologne he never wore for me. Suddenly, everything seemed like part of a picture I hadn't been invited to see. The lunch sat on the passenger seat, untouched, smelling faintly of lemon and rosemary. It made my stomach turn. I didn't cry, not yet. The tears were waiting, heavy behind my eyes. But something in me refused to let them fall here, in this parking lot. I started the car, my hands still shaking, and pulled away. The sun was still shining, the sky still impossibly blue, but it all felt like a cruel joke. And as I drove home, one question kept looping in my head, louder than the hum of the engine. If he's not going to work, then where has he been going? By the time I got home, the silence felt heavier than usual. It wrapped around me like a damp blanket, suffocating, sticky. I set the lunch bag on the kitchen counter and just stared at it. The thought of opening it, of eating anything, made my throat tighten. My hands moved on their own, grabbing a glass of water, setting it down untouched, like I needed to prove to myself I was still functioning. But my mind was already miles away, chasing shadows I didn't want to find. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. His side was unmade from that morning, the sheet still holding the shape of where he'd lain. I reached over, my fingers brushing the pillow, and felt that familiar sting in my chest. How many mornings had he left from here, smiling, telling me he'd be back before dinner? And how many of those smiles had been lies? I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, but every inhale seemed to pull in more questions I couldn't answer. That night, I decided I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. If Robert had been hiding something from me for months, he clearly thought I was too blind to notice. Maybe, just maybe, I could use that to my advantage. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew one thing for certain. The man I thought I knew was already slipping away, and I needed to find out exactly where he'd been before he disappeared completely. That night, I lay in bed with my back to him, pretending to be asleep when he finally walked in. I heard the soft rustle of his clothes, the faint click of his phone screen before he set it on the nightstand. He slid under the covers like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't been living in an entirely different reality than the one I thought we shared. My heart pounded, but I kept my breathing steady. If he noticed my stiffness, he didn't say a word. The next morning, over coffee, he complained about a long meeting the day before and how exhausted he was. I watched him talk, nodding at all the right moments, while my mind replayed the receptionist's words in a loop. I didn't ask about work. I didn't let him know that the ground beneath him had already started to crack. If he was going to keep lying, I wanted to see just how far he'd go. Later that evening, after he fell asleep on the couch, I grabbed my laptop and logged into our bank account. My stomach dropped. There were large cash withdrawals, always in round numbers, spread across the last few months. Hotel charges, dinners at places I'd never been with him. The evidence wasn't loud or flashy, but it was there, threaded through our finances like a quiet confession. And in that moment, I realized the truth might be far uglier than simple unemployment. I sat there in the dim light of the living room, the glow of the laptop making the shadows around me seem even darker. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as if stopping could make the truth disappear. But each new transaction I clicked on painted a clearer picture. Money dripping away like a slow leak I hadn't noticed, each drop funding a life I wasn't part of. I thought of the cologne I'd smelled faintly on his jacket last week. Not mine, not his usual scent. I had brushed it off as maybe a sample from a store. Now it clung in my memory like a warning I'd ignored. My chest felt tight, a mix of rage and disbelief twisting together. I tried to remember the last time we had gone out together for dinner, the last time he'd spent money on us. I couldn't. The withdrawals told a story, but it was missing the main character. Her. Whoever she was costing him more than money. She was costing me my marriage, piece by piece, and I didn't even know her face. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing from the couch. How could he sleep so easily while I sat here drowning in questions? I thought about waking him, throwing the evidence in his face, demanding answers right then. But something inside me, something new, sharper, told me to wait. If I played this right, I wouldn't just get the truth, I'd get control. The next few days, I became an actress in my own home. I laughed at his small jokes, asked about his meetings, and even packed his lunch one morning like I used to. Every word I spoke felt rehearsed, carefully measured, so he'd have no idea I was already peeling back the layers of his lies. Inside, though, I was a live wire. Every detail he gave me was stored away. Every slip in his story filed in a mental cabinet I was building just for him. At night, when he thought I was scrolling through recipes or checking emails, I was digging deeper. I searched the names of restaurants on his statements, found their menus, imagined him sitting at a table across from someone else. I pictured her laugh, her hand brushing his, the way he might look at her in the soft light. My stomach churned, but I kept going, because now it wasn't just about knowing if he was cheating. It was about knowing everything. One thing was becoming clearer by the hour. This wasn't a man who had stumbled into a mistake. This was someone building a second life with precision and arrogance. And I was going to dismantle it piece by piece until he was standing in the ruins. But first, I had to see exactly where he went when he left in the morning with that tie and briefcase. The first morning I decided to follow him, I felt like I was stepping into someone else's life. I waited until he left, tie perfectly knotted, travel mug in hand, giving me a quick kiss before walking out the door. I counted to 30 before grabbing my keys and sliding into my car. My heart was pounding, not from fear of being caught, but from the electric charge of knowing that finally, I was about to pull back the curtain on his performance. He didn't drive toward the office. He didn't even take the freeway. Instead, he wound his way through side streets until he stopped at a cafe I'd never been to. I parked a few spaces away, my sunglasses on, pretending to scroll through my phone while I watched him through the rearview mirror. He sat at a corner table with his laptop, sipping coffee, chatting casually with the barista. No rush, no stress, definitely no work. The next day, I followed again. This time, he left the cafe after an hour and drove to a small apartment complex on the other side of town. I didn't see him come back out. I sat there for 2 hours, gripping the steering wheel, watching other tenants come and go. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them innocent. The man who had told me every morning he was heading to the office was actually stepping into a life I'd never been invited into. By the third day, I knew this wasn't just a detour, it was a routine. The cafe, the apartment complex, sometimes a late lunch at a bistro that didn't even open until noon. He moved through his days with the ease of someone who believed no one was watching, but I was watching. And every mile I trailed him, every receipt I photographed from the cafe trash bin, every timestamp I noted, it all became part of a growing dossier. Still, I wanted more than my own eyes could give me. So I called a private investigator, someone discreet and seasoned, the kind who could blend in anywhere. When I handed him the initial details, license plate, addresses, dates, he gave me a look that was part pity, part professional focus. "We'll find out everything," he said. It was both comforting and devastating, because part of me already knew what he'd find. The PI didn't take long. Within days, I had photos. Robert at the apartment with a woman, their heads close together, arms brushing, laughter frozen mid-frame. They looked comfortable, practiced. And then there were the receipts, dinners, weekend trips, even a pair of concert tickets. I stared at the evidence, my pulse steady, almost unnervingly calm. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a fact. He had built an entire life using our money, our time, our trust. And I was about to take it all back. I tucked the folder of evidence into the back of my closet, behind a stack of old blankets, where I knew he'd never look. Each time I opened it, I added something new. A time-stamped photo, a bank statement, a printout of text messages the PI had intercepted. It felt like I was quietly building a weapon, one I'd use when the moment was right. This wasn't just about catching him. It was about making sure he couldn't walk away without losing everything he thought he controlled. Before I confronted him, I needed to make sure I wasn't the one left with the wreckage. So I booked an appointment with a lawyer, a woman recommended by a friend who had walked away from her own cheating husband with more than just her dignity. We talked through the finances, the joint accounts, the house, the retirement fund. By the time I left her office, the legal paperwork was in motion to secure everything that was rightfully mine. Driving home, I felt an odd sense of peace, the kind that comes when you know the ending of the story before the final chapter even begins. Robert had no idea his quiet mornings at the cafe, his afternoons in that apartment, were numbered. And when his curtain finally fell, he wouldn't just lose me. He'd lose the life he thought he'd stolen right out from under me. When I called Robert to invite him to dinner, my voice was warm, light, like I was the same wife he thought he'd been fooling. "I've got something to celebrate," I told him. "Book off the evening. I want it to be just us, and a few people you'll be happy to see." He agreed without hesitation, probably imagining some romantic gesture to remind him how lucky he was. He had no idea I was planning the final act. I reserved a private dining room at a restaurant he liked, classy enough to impress, intimate enough for my real purpose. Then I called a few people, his sister, his closest friend, and 2 colleagues he still respected, the ones whose opinions he valued. I wanted an audience. Not for me. For the truth. Because Robert cared deeply about how he looked in front of them, and I was about to shatter that image in one perfect blow. When the night came, I wore a dress he'd always complimented, my hair done just the way he liked. I greeted everyone with warmth, laughter, making sure Robert was relaxed, basking in the glow of being at the center of attention. We ordered wine, shared appetizers, and he leaned in toward me more than once, as if this night was ours. And then, right when the table was warm with conversation, I leaned back in my chair and said, "Robert, why don't you tell everyone what you've been doing these past few months since quitting your job?" The table went quiet, just like I knew it would. Robert blinked at me, caught between confusion and the beginning of panic. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd been curating for weeks. I laid it in the center of the table like it was nothing more than a menu, then opened it slowly so each page faced the people who mattered to him most. There they were, photos of him at the apartment, receipts for dinners he hadn't shared with me, hotel bookings paid in cash, bank statements showing withdrawals that told their own sordid story. I didn't have to narrate. The evidence spoke with a volume no denial could silence. His sister's eyes widened. His friend shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Robert reached for the papers, muttering something about misunderstandings and out of context, but his voice cracked under the weight of what everyone could see. I sat back, calm, watching the color drain from his face. "You didn't lose your job," I said evenly. "You gave it up. You gave us up, and you thought I'd never find out." The room felt colder, sharper. Every eye at the table was on him, but the only gaze he couldn't meet was mine. And that was exactly how I wanted it. He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off with the final line I'd been saving for weeks. "Enjoy your freedom, Robert. You're going to need it, with no job, no savings, and no wife." My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The weight of the words settled over the table like a lead blanket. You could almost hear the moment his pride cracked. He glanced around, as if searching for an ally, but no one came to his rescue. His sister pushed her chair back, her face pale with disappointment. His friend shook his head slowly, as if realizing he'd been defending a man who didn't deserve it. I gathered my things with a steady grace, slipping the folder back into my bag. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I wanted him to remember every page for the rest of his life. As I walked toward the door, I didn't look back. The sound of muted voices and the faint clink of glasses followed me out into the hallway, but the only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady, certain. Robert had spent months living a performance. Tonight, I had given him his final audience. And now, it was time for my next act. The morning after that dinner felt different, lighter, cleaner, like the air in my lungs had been filtered of something toxic. Robert was gone before I even woke up, but for the first time, I didn't care where he'd gone or who he was with. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I made coffee and drank it slowly at the kitchen table, my phone buzzing with messages from people who'd been there last night. Most were short, variations of, "I'm proud of you," or "You deserved better." I didn't need validation, but I let their words sink in anyway. The days that followed were a blur of practical steps, closing joint accounts, transferring titles, finalizing the paperwork with my lawyer. Each signature I put on a form felt like reclaiming another piece of myself he'd tried to chip away. He didn't fight me for much. Maybe he knew he didn't have the ground to stand on. Or maybe he was too busy chasing whatever scraps of his other life he could salvage. Either way, his absence became my freedom. The woman he'd been seeing disappeared quickly once she realized there was no money left, no comfortable safety net to fall into. I imagined their last conversation, him explaining the fallout, her calculating just how fast she could walk away. A small part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. But then I remembered the months of lies, the stolen money, the humiliation he'd planned for me without my knowing, and all I felt was relief. With Robert out of the picture, my world started to expand in ways I hadn't realized it had been shrinking. I booked a solo trip. Nothing extravagant, just a week by the coast where I could wake up to the sound of waves instead of the weight of suspicion. I walked barefoot along the shore, letting the water rush over my feet, feeling the tide pull away months of anger and exhaustion. I caught myself smiling at strangers, laughing at little things again. It was like remembering how to breathe after holding my breath for too long. Back home, I started saying yes more often, to friends who wanted to meet for dinner, to opportunities at work I'd been too distracted to take on, to mornings where I simply stayed in bed with a book because I felt like it. I filled my space with people who lifted me up instead of wearing me down. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like mine. Every corner, every shelf, every quiet Sunday morning belonged to me now. I knew there would be moments when the past would tap me on the shoulder, when I'd remember the way things used to be before I knew the truth. But I also knew I wouldn't trade what I had now for the illusion I once lived in. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always come in the way you expect. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the wreckage of what you thought you wanted. The final step was signing the last of the divorce papers at my lawyer's office. She slid them across the desk, and I read every word. Not because I doubted her, but because I wanted to feel each sentence, to know exactly what I was walking away with. My hand didn't shake as I signed. When I set the pen down, it felt like I'd just closed the heaviest chapter of my life and placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. Stepping outside, the sun was warm on my face, brighter than it had felt in months. I didn't have anywhere urgent to be, no one's expectations to manage, no lies to decode. Just me, the open day, and the life I'd rebuilt piece by piece. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills every corner of your lungs, and felt a calm certainty settle in. As I walked to my car, I thought about how he'd left his job months ago, slipping out of one life into another without telling me. But today, I had matched him step for step, and made sure he walked out of mine for good.
I'll never forget the sound of the wrapping paper being torn. It was the only noise anyone could hear. No music, no laughter, just that quiet crinkle as my daughter Maya carefully unwrapped her gift. Her small fingers tugged at the corners as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and for a moment, she actually smiled. That gentle, hopeful smile children get when they believe magic might still exist. But when she opened the box, her entire expression shifted. Confusion came first, then a flicker of something deeper, pain perhaps. Her little shoulders stiffened and she glanced at me. The box was empty. I saw it before she said anything, just a plain cardboard bottom. No tissue paper, no gift, not even a note. I blinked, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Was it a mistake? Had something fallen out? But before I could speak, I heard him, my father Theodore. He released a sharp laugh, cold and abrupt like a bark in winter. He settled back in his armchair, crossed his arms, and declared, "Children like her shouldn't expect anything. The world has enough entitled people already." My heart sank. Maya froze, her hand still in the box as if she hadn't yet discovered the gift might be hiding under the flaps or tucked in a corner. But there was nothing. I felt heat rising in my chest. My hands trembled where they rested on my lap. I wanted to respond, but the words caught in my throat like splinters. Then Victoria, my sister, scoffed and muttered, "She's just like her mother, always expecting handouts." Predictable. My jaw tightened. I could feel the muscles in my face constricting, the burning behind my eyes threatening to spill over. I forced myself to look at Maya. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her lips were pressed together, and her chin was quivering the way it does right before breaking. Her eyes, those large, gentle eyes, were filling with tears she was too proud to let fall. She looked at me again, not asking for help, just checking if she should pretend it didn't hurt. In that moment, I detested myself. I hated that I brought her here, that I foolishly hoped for a normal Christmas, that I thought my father might be different. I wanted them to see the beautiful, kind, creative girl Maya was and love her as I did. But they didn't see her. To them, she was merely an extension of me, a reminder of my divorce, my failures, the mess I'd made of my life according to their standards. The room was completely silent except for the soft hum of the heater and the ticking of the grandfather clock behind Theodore's chair. Each second sounded louder than the last, as if counting down to a moment I wasn't prepared for. Maya looked down at the empty box again. Her fingers brushed the edge, then slowly she folded the flap shut. Her hands were shaking now, and then she whispered something. "I made you a gift too, Grandpa." Everyone turned. Theodore looked up, that smug smile still on his face. "Oh, really?" he said, half laughing. "This should be interesting." But Maya didn't retreat. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper folded with such care it made my chest ache. She stepped forward and held it out to him with both hands, and right then I knew this moment wasn't finished. Something was coming that none of us were prepared for. I hadn't returned home for Christmas in over 2 years, not since the divorce, not since the shame, not since everything I'd been trying to maintain finally broke apart completely. Maya wanted to see them. She had asked me 3 weeks before Christmas, "Mom, do I have a grandfather?" That was her way of asking why we were always alone during the holidays, why we didn't have matching pajamas or elaborate trees or cousins to play with. So I said yes, and when she asked if we could visit him this year, I agreed again, against my better judgment. I don't know what I anticipated. Perhaps I thought time might have softened them. Maybe I believed just briefly that when they saw Maya, when they truly looked at her, they would feel something. Warmth, regret, love, anything. Instead, the moment we pulled into the driveway, I felt that familiar weight settle back onto my shoulders, that invisible tension that wraps around your ribs like barbed wire when you're trying to smile for people who don't really want you present. Their house remained unchanged, still austere, still immaculate, still spotless in that way that feels less like a home and more like a museum. My mother greeted us with that artificial pleasantness she perfected over the years, a quick embrace for me, gentle pat on the head for Maya. Her gaze lingered too long on the scuff marks on Maya's boots. I noticed how she assessed her, like an item on a shelf, deciding whether she belonged. Victoria barely looked up from her phone when we entered. She offered Maya a half-hearted "hey," then returned to scrolling. I could already feel my stomach clenching. And then there was Theodore, my father. He was in his customary chair by the fireplace, whiskey glass in one hand, television remote in the other. He didn't even stand, just gave a nod and muttered, "Didn't think you'd actually appear." That was his version of hello. Maya gave him a shy wave, her mittened fingers poking through the wool. "Hi, Grandpa," she said quietly, as if testing the word aloud for the first time. He grunted in response. I don't know why I still hoped for more. Maybe because Maya was trying so earnestly. She had created small drawings for everyone, carefully colored, folded, and tucked into envelopes with their names on the front. She even asked me how to spell Aunt Victoria because she wanted it to be perfect. She worked on them every evening for a week. I wanted this to be special for her. I wanted her to feel like she had a family, even if they were far from ideal. I gathered what I could from tips and extra shifts just to buy her one nice outfit, a small gift to open, and enough gas to get us there. That morning, as I tied her scarf, she looked up at me and asked, "Do you think they'll like my drawings?" I replied, "Sweetheart, they're going to love them." But in the pit of my stomach, I already knew the truth. I was bringing her into a house where kindness was currency they never dispensed freely, where smiles were measured and love had conditions. Still, I tried. I told myself this was about Maya, not me, that I could maintain my composure, be polite, pretend for one day that everything was fine. But as I watched her heart quietly break in front of them over something as cruel as an empty gift box, I realized they hadn't changed, and I wasn't sure they ever would. Maya distributed her little envelopes like they were treasures. She moved through the room so gently, as if afraid to disturb anything. Each envelope had a name on the front written in her careful, blocky handwriting. She gave one to my mother first, then Victoria, then even my brother Mark, who had barely spoken since we arrived. When she reached Theodore, she paused briefly, just long enough that I held my breath. But she smiled, extended the envelope, and said, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa." He didn't look up from the television, just held out his hand as if she were delivering mail, not offering a piece of herself. She returned to the couch and sat beside me, her face still illuminated with hope. She had no idea how cold the room had become. Then Theodore lifted a large box from beneath the tree. It was wrapped in silver paper, topped with a red bow, almost too perfectly. He held it toward Maya with a grunt. "For me?" she asked. He shrugged. "Has your name, doesn't it?" She looked at me first, as if seeking permission. I nodded, even though something in my gut twisted. She moved to the floor and pulled the box onto her lap. Her small hands caressed the paper as if it were sacred. I watched her savor every moment, the careful removal of each piece of tape, the methodical unfolding. She wanted to preserve the memory. Then the lid came off. She peered inside, and I witnessed the exact moment she realized it was empty. Her face didn't crumple immediately. Instead, her eyebrows drew together in confusion. She reached in as if something might be concealed at the bottom. She looked up at me, uncertain. There was nothing in the box. Nothing. Theodore laughed loudly this time. "What were you expecting? Something real?" He scoffed, leaning back. "The world doesn't give you gifts just for showing up, kid." Maya blinked. Her hands froze. I couldn't move. Then Victoria, always waiting for an opportunity to inflict pain, chimed in from her corner of the couch. "Well, she is just like her mother, always expecting people to give her things. It's hardly surprising." I felt it in my chest like a physical blow. I turned to her. "Victoria, don't." She raised an eyebrow, smirking. "What?" "It's true." Maya was silent now. The box still rested in her lap, flaps wide open, exposing the emptiness inside. The room had turned against her, and I saw her realize it. I hated them. I hated them for making her feel insignificant, for making her question her worth, for laughing as if it were all a joke. I reached for her, but she didn't move. She just kept staring at the box as if it might somehow fill itself if she waited long enough. Inside, I was screaming, "Say something. Stand up. Defend her." But I didn't want to create a scene, not in front of her. That's the thing about families like this. You learn to freeze when things turn cruel. You learn to smile through clenched teeth, and I'd spent so many years doing exactly that it almost felt normal. But it wasn't normal. Maya was only 7. She didn't know how to wear a mask yet. She didn't know how to swallow that kind of pain. Then she looked up at Theodore. Her voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the room like a bell. "It's okay," she said. "I made you a gift too, Grandpa." And just like that, the entire room shifted. No one spoke. No one laughed. She reached into her coat pocket, and I realized something was about to happen that none of them would forget. I watched her, completely still, as Maya reached into her pocket. The room had gone silent, so quiet I could hear the faint creak of the old floorboard under the Christmas tree with every slight movement. My own breath felt too loud in my chest. She withdrew a folded piece of paper. It looked small in her hands, fragile even, like something that could be crumpled and dismissed without consideration. But she held it as if it mattered, as if it meant something. I whispered, "Maya, maybe not now." She turned to me, and there was something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Not sadness, not hurt, but a calm steadiness. She gave a little nod, the kind that said, "I need to do this." Then she turned to Theodore. "I made this for you," she said. Theodore didn't even lean forward. He just glanced at it with that same bored expression he always wore when someone dared ask him to feel something. "Oh yeah," he muttered, sipping his drink. "You draw me a snowman or something?" There was sarcasm in his voice, the kind he always used when he wanted to diminish you without raising it. But Maya didn't flinch. She walked across the room and held it out to him with both hands. That's when I noticed her fingers were trembling. I knew that feeling, the way your hands betray you when your heart's pounding in your chest, when you're trying to be brave even though every part of you wants to flee. He took it from her indifferently, unfolded it with one hand while still holding his glass in the other. Then he looked down and stopped. I couldn't see what was on the paper from where I sat, but I saw his face. It didn't twist in confusion or irritation as I expected. Instead, his eyebrows drew together. He blinked once, then again. His jaw slackened slightly, as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. The entire room seemed to lean in. "What is it?" Victoria asked impatiently. He didn't answer, just stared. Maya stood there, hands clasped in front of her now, watching him quietly, as if she wasn't sure what would happen next. I rose and crossed the room slowly, almost afraid to disrupt the moment. I stood beside her and gently placed my hand on her back. She didn't look at me, she just kept her eyes on Theodore. And he looked older than I'd ever seen him. Not angry, not smug, just still. He folded the paper carefully, deliberately, almost reverently, and placed it on the side table next to his chair. Then he stood up. No one knew what to say. No one moved. He walked out of the room without a word. The sound of his footsteps down the hallway was the only thing we could hear. He didn't slam the door, didn't shout, just left. I looked down at Maya. Her voice was quiet when she asked, "Did I do something wrong?" I knelt beside her, wrapped my arms around her, and whispered, "No, sweetheart. You did something brave." Victoria muttered something under her breath, but this time I didn't care. Because I knew whatever Maya had drawn, whatever she had written, it penetrated him in a way none of us ever could. She didn't retaliate with anger. She didn't cry or scream or run. She gave him a gift, one that reminded him he was still human, even if he'd forgotten. And I think just maybe that frightened him more than anything else. I didn't see my father for the rest of the day. He didn't return to the living room, didn't come for dinner, not even when my mother announced that dessert was ready in that overly cheerful tone she used when pretending everything was fine. Maya didn't mention him again that evening. She played quietly with the ribbon from one of her other small gifts and helped me fold the wrapping paper scraps as if it were any other night. But I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Occasionally her eyes would wander toward the hallway where Theodore had disappeared, as if she were waiting for something. But nothing happened, not that day. We left early the next morning. I told them we had plans back in the city, but the truth was I couldn't bear to spend another minute pretending. Victoria didn't even get up to say goodbye. My mother handed me a foil-covered plate of leftover ham and told me to drive safely. No mention of what had happened. No one asked how Maya was feeling, and that somehow hurt even more. The ride home was quiet. Maya stared out the window, watching snow blur past the trees. I reached over and held her hand. She squeezed back. I didn't bring up the drawing. I didn't want to make her explain something that was clearly so personal. I didn't want to dissect whatever magic had existed in that moment, but I thought about it the entire drive home. What had she drawn that made my father, the man who once called me too sensitive for crying during a movie, turn pale and leave the room without a word? I found out 4 days later. It arrived in a small unmarked box left on our porch. There was no return address, just Maya's name written in careful block letters across the top. She opened it slowly, as if uncertain whether it was safe to hope. Inside was a tiny music box, old-fashioned wooden, with hand-carved edges and little roses painted around the lid. It played Somewhere Over the Rainbow when she turned the crank. And there was a note, just one line, handwritten in a shaky, unfamiliar script. To the bravest girl I know. Thank you for remembering her. No signature, but we didn't need one. Maya clutched the box to her chest as if it were made of gold. She didn't speak at first, just held it and smiled. I sat down next to her on the floor and finally asked, "Maya, what did you draw for Grandpa?" She looked up at me. "It was a picture of him holding hands with Grandma and you," she said softly. I told him I hope he smiles again someday because I remember how she made him laugh. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak, because that was it. That was the part of him I'd forgotten even existed. The man who once smiled, once laughed, before grief hardened him, before the years made him cruel. Maya saw through all of that and gave him a fragment of something he thought he'd lost forever. Not pity, not guilt, but hope. She didn't try to fix him. She just reminded him that he used to be someone worth remembering. And in return he gave her something too. Maybe not love, maybe not forgiveness, but a beginning. Sometimes that's enough. The music box now sits on Maya's nightstand. Every night before bed, she winds it up, not always to listen. Sometimes she just likes to hold it, to feel its weight in her hands, to know it's there, the way a child might clutch a stuffed animal they've outgrown but still can't release. She hasn't mentioned much about that day since, but occasionally she'll talk about Grandma, someone she never met but speaks about as if she's still present, as if she's someone Maya knows through my stories and the quiet space she left behind. And maybe she does. Theodore never called. He didn't send a follow-up message, no apology, no explanations. That's not who he is, perhaps not who he'll ever be. But a week after the music box arrived, I received a letter. It wasn't addressed to Maya. It was for me. It was brief, 3 lines written in the same uneven handwriting. I was wrong about you. She's a remarkable child. I hope you're managing well. No name, but I knew. And for reasons I can't fully explain, I cried after reading it. Not because it made everything better, not because it erased the years of silence or the way he used to look through me as if I were a disappointment wearing a name tag, but because for once it felt like he saw me, and more importantly, he saw Maya. He recognized what I've always known, that she's extraordinary, that she has this way of peeling back the coldness in a room and revealing people's own warmth, even when they don't deserve it. She's not loud, she doesn't demand attention, but she transforms things. She transformed him, not completely, but enough. Enough to make a man who closed the door on the world open it just a crack. Enough to make someone who believed only in toughness and silence sit down and listen to the music from a little girl's drawing. He recognized what I've always known, that she's extraordinary, that she has this way of peeling back the coldness in a room and revealing people's own warmth, even when they don't deserve it. She's not loud, she doesn't demand attention, but she transforms things. She transformed him, not completely, but enough. Enough to make a man who closed the door on the world open it just a crack. Enough to make someone who believed only in toughness and silence sit down and listen to the music from a little girl's drawing. People sometimes ask why I returned that Christmas, why I allowed them near her, why I didn't shield her more effectively. The truth is, I thought I was. I thought protecting her from their coldness would be sufficient, that avoiding discussion of them, not visiting, not engaging, would safeguard her heart. But Maya didn't need protection, she needed truth. She needed to meet them, to see the world as it is, beautiful and cruel, broken and hopeful, all intertwined. And somehow, instead of becoming lost in it, she decided to contribute her own light. She didn't seek revenge, she didn't even want an apology. She just wanted to give a gift. And that gift, as simple as it was, accomplished something I couldn't do in 30 years. It opened a door. Not wide, not permanently, but enough for a note to pass through. Enough for a song to play in the silence. Enough for a weary old man to remember a part of himself he thought was gone. Maya reminded me of something that day too, that sometimes kindness is the most radical action, that a whisper can carry more weight than a shout, and that when we choose love, even when it's difficult, even when it's unrequited, we create something no one can take away. A moment, a shift, a gift. I remember the exact moment when the delicate balance of lies and truth in our family shattered like fine china. It was during the toast, when champagne glasses caught the light and everyone was smiling. That perfect moment in a wedding when everything seems golden and hopeful. My sister Elise looked radiant, her new husband Thomas gazing at her with undisguised adoration. My mother dabbed at her eyes while my father beamed with pride. And my grandfather Robert, the family patriarch, respected restaurateur, and guardian of our Italian culinary heritage, was preparing to make his traditional speech. It should have been perfect, but I knew better. To my beautiful granddaughter, he began, his voice carrying the slight accent that 60 years in America had never quite erased. May your marriage be as sweet as the torta della nonna I have made for your wedding day, a cake from a recipe passed down through 5 generations of our family. The cake stood on a table nearby, 3 elegant tiers of delicate pastry with pine nuts and lemon cream, a confection that had graced every significant family celebration since before I was born. It was more than dessert, it was our legacy. Grandfather lifted his glass. Family is everything. Loyalty is everything. And secrets. His eyes found mine across the room. Secrets must be kept. I felt my heart quicken. The weight of the small recipe box in my purse seemed to grow heavier. 3 weeks earlier, while helping clean out my grandmother's belongings after she passed away, I had found it buried at the back of her closet. Not the ornate wooden box that sat in grandfather's kitchen, the one he ceremoniously opened for special occasions, but a plain metal one, rusted at the corners and secured with a small padlock. Inside were recipes, but not the ones I expected. Not the versions he'd shown us, taught us, built his restaurant empire around. These were the originals, with notes in my grandmother's handwriting that revealed the truth. Our famous family recipes had been stolen. Stolen from Ariana Ritchie, my grandmother's closest friend who disappeared in 1965, never to be heard from again. The woman whose culinary genius had actually created the dishes that made our family name synonymous with fine Italian cuisine in America. As grandfather continued his speech, His words washed over me without registering. All I could think about was the evidence in my purse, evidence that our entire family legacy was built on theft, possibly worse. I had confronted him privately the day before. Tell the truth, I had urged. Acknowledge Ariana. It's not too late to make this right. His face had hardened, eyes turning cold. You understand nothing, he'd said. Some secrets must stay buried. For the family. I hadn't planned to expose him at the wedding. I truly hadn't. But when he raised that toast, claiming once again that the recipes were from our bloodline, something in me snapped. I stood up. That's not entirely true, grandfather, I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. Would you like to tell everyone who really created that cake recipe, or shall I? The room froze. My sister's smile faltered. My mother's hand gripped my father's arm. Sophia. My grandfather's voice was a warning, low and dangerous. Sit down. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Years of being the family peacekeeper, the quiet one, the one who never made waves, it all fell away in that moment. The recipes were Ariana Ritchie's, I said clearly, grandmother's friend. The one who moved away suddenly in 1965. Grandfather took her recipe collection when she disappeared. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My sister was staring at me in horror. That's why our torta della nonna tastes different from any other version in Italy. That's why no one can replicate it, because it was never ours to begin with. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Grandfather set down his glass with deliberate care. He walked, not rushed, not hurried, but with terrible purpose, to the cake table. For a bizarre moment, I thought he might cut a slice, as if continuing the celebration would erase my words. Instead, he picked up the bottom tier with both hands and hurled it against the wall. Cream and pastry exploded outward. Guests jumped back, crying out in shock. The delicate china plates on the nearby table rattled with the impact. You he roared, turning to me, his face a mask of rage I'd never seen before. That recipe goes to you die with your grandmother. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one seemed to breathe. In that moment, I understood that I had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Security escorted my grandfather out. The wedding planner hurried to clean up the destroyed cake. My sister didn't speak to me as she and Thomas left early for their honeymoon, her perfect day tarnished beyond repair. My parents were divided, my mother tearful and angry, my father quiet and troubled. You couldn't have waited. My mother kept asking, just one day that wasn't about the past. But it was my father's reaction that surprised me most. As we sat in the hotel bar late that night, he stared into his whiskey and said, there was always something about Ariana's disappearance that didn't sit right. Your grandfather's story changed too many times. I stayed awake until dawn, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. I had exposed a family secret, yes, but at what cost? What did justice for a woman gone for almost 60 years matter against my sister's ruined wedding? Questions plagued me in the weeks that followed. What really happened to Ariana Ritchie? Why had my grandmother kept the original recipes hidden rather than destroyed? And what did my grandfather mean when he said the recipe was supposed to die with her? No one from the family contacted me. My calls to my sister went unanswered. My mother's texts were cold and formal. The family restaurant where I'd worked as pastry chef since culinary school removed my name from the website. I was adrift, cut off from everything and everyone that had defined my life. Then came the call, 3 months after the wedding. Sophia. My grandfather's voice sounded weak, diminished. I'm at Mercy Hospital. Come alone. It's time you knew everything. I found him in a private room, oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors beeping steadily beside him. He looked smaller somehow, his once commanding presence reduced by white hospital sheets and the Johnny gown that replaced his usual impeccable suits. The doctors say it's my heart, he said without preamble. Ironic, no? They say I don't have much time. I sat in the chair beside his bed, unsure what to say. My anger had cooled over the months, leaving behind confusion and grief. You were right about Ariana, he said finally, his eyes fixed on the window where late afternoon light streamed in. The recipes were hers, but there's more to the story than you know. He gestured weakly toward the small cabinet beside his bed. In my wallet, the key. I found a small brass key tucked into a hidden compartment of his wallet, tarnished with age. My safe deposit box at First National, box 247. He drew a labored breath. You'll find everything there. Letters, documents, the truth. Why now? I asked. After all this time, why tell me? Because you're the only one who asked questions. The only one who saw past the story we created. His hand trembled as he reached for the water glass. I helped him take a sip. What happened to Ariana? I asked, the question that had haunted me since discovering the recipe box. A shadow passed over his face. I didn't kill her, if that's what you're thinking. But I might as well have. He closed his eyes briefly. The secret ingredient in the torta della nonna. Did you ever wonder why no one could replicate it exactly? I nodded. The unique flavor that made our family's version so distinctive was something I tried to identify for years as a pastry chef. Belladonna, he said softly. Just a trace amount. Not enough to harm, just enough to create a distinctive bitter note that balances the sweetness. An old technique from her village in Italy. My blood went cold. Belladonna, deadly nightshade. A poison. But that's dangerous, yes, in the wrong amounts. His eyes met mine. Ariana knew exactly how much to use. She'd been trained by her grandmother, who was trained by hers. An unbroken line of knowledge. So what happened? Your grandmother and I were experimenting with the recipe, trying to make a special version for a visit by a famous food critic. We got the amount wrong. His voice broke. A customer died, Sophia, a young mother celebrating her birthday. I felt the room tilt slightly, and Ariana, she wanted to go to the police, confess everything, said it was the only honorable thing to do. He looked down at his gnarled hands. I convinced her to wait, just one day, to think it through. That night, she packed her things and tried to leave town. And I prompted when he fell silent. There was an accident on the coastal highway. Her car went over the edge. They never found her body. He closed his eyes. I don't know if it was really an accident. I've asked myself that question for 60 years. The implications washed over me in waves of horror. So you took her recipes and removed the belladonna from all of them except the torta. For that one, I drastically reduced the amount, made it safer. His voice had a pleading quality now. The cake was our signature, Sophia. People expected it, but only your grandmother and I ever made it. Only we knew. Until she died, I finished, and then only you. He nodded. I was going to let it end with me. No more torta della nonna after I'm gone. That was the plan. But then I found the recipe box. And you made the cake for your sister's wedding. With the original recipe. His eyes filled with fear. Tell me you didn't use the full amount specified. Tell me you adjusted it. Ice flooded my veins. I thought back to that day, determined to recreate Ariana's authentic version. I had followed her handwritten notes exactly, including the instruction to add 3 drops of the dark tincture stored in a small bottle labeled Essenza Amara, bitter essence. I followed the recipe exactly, I whispered. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. How many ate it? Before I destroyed it. Just a few. The bridal party had the first slices during the photographs. Elise, Thomas, the maid of honor, best man. His face went ashen. Call your sister. Now. My hands shook as I dialed Eliza's number. It went to voicemail, as it had every time I called since the wedding. I tried Thomas. No answer. I tried the maid of honor, my cousin Lucia. Nothing. Try your mother, my grandfather urged, his breathing becoming more labored. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cold. Sophia, this isn't a good time. Mom, it's an emergency. Where's Elise? Is she okay? There was a pause, then why wouldn't she be okay? Relief flooded through me. She's fine. No health issues after the wedding. What are you talking about? Of course she's fine. They just got back from Thailand yesterday. Sophia, what's going on? I covered the phone and looked at my grandfather. She's fine. They all are. He closed his eyes, his body relaxing slightly. Thank God, he whispered. Then you must have unknowingly adjusted the recipe. Something about his certainty bothered me. I thought back to the small bottle in Ariana's recipe box, the one labeled Essenza Amara. I had assumed it was belladonna. But what if? Grandfather, what exactly does belladonna look like in a recipe? How is it stored? An oil, dark green, almost black, in a blue glass bottle with a red wax seal. He frowned. Why? The bottle I'd used had been clear glass. The liquid inside was dark, but more brown than green, and the seal had been plain paraffin, not red wax. I don't think I used belladonna at all, I said slowly. The bottle in the recipe box was different from what you described. I think Ariana may have changed the recipe before she disappeared. My grandfather stared at me, confusion evident in his rheumy eyes. That's not possible. I saw the original recipe when I took her collection. It definitely called for belladonna. A thought struck me. You read Italian fluently? He hesitated. Well enough. Your grandmother translated the difficult parts. I pulled out my phone and found the photo I'd taken of Ariana's original recipe. The instructions were in a mixture of Italian and English, with one section heavily annotated in the margins. Listen to this note, I said, reading from the image. Per I curiose e I ladrai, for the curious and thieves, assenza amara sembra pericolosa ma a solo radis de genziana e corteccia de China. Grandfather. She replaced the belladonna with gentian root and cinchona bark. It creates the same bitter taste, but isn't poisonous. His face went slack with shock. That's not possible. The customer died. At my restaurant. Did she? Did you actually see it happen? I pressed, a terrible suspicion forming. No, there was a call. From the hospital. They said she'd been brought in after dining with us. That she died from what appeared to be nightshade poisoning. And Ariana disappeared that same night? He nodded slowly, the implications dawning on him just as they had on me. Grandfather, I think Ariana realized what you and grandmother were planning. I think she removed the actual poison from her recipe, replaced it with safe bitter herbs, and then, I think she staged her own death and disappeared. But the young mother who died, did you ever get her name? See a death certificate? Or did you just panic and help cover up what you thought was manslaughter? His eyes widened. For the first time in my life, I saw my grandfather, the man who ruled our family with unwavering certainty, look completely lost. 60 years, he whispered. 60 years of guilt, of nightmares, of covering up a death that never happened. I reached for his hand. I need to see what's in that safe deposit box. The next morning, I stood in a small room at First National Bank, my grandfather's key turning in the lock of box 247. Inside was a manila envelope yellowed with age and a smaller white envelope addressed simply to Roberto. I opened the manila envelope first. Inside were newspaper clippings, not about a death or an accident, but small items from various cities across the country over a span of decades. A new Italian restaurant opening in Chicago in 1967. A profile of a female chef pioneering authentic regional Italian cuisine in Boston in 1975. A retirement announcement for a culinary instructor in Santa Fe from 1992. Different names appeared in each article, but the photographs showed the same woman at different ages. Ariana Ricci, very much alive, living her life under various identities. With trembling hands, I opened the letter. Roberto, by the time you read this, if you ever do, I will likely be gone from this world for real. I've left instructions for these documents to find their way to you only after my death. I knew what you and Gianna were planning. I heard you discussing it, how to improve my recipes, how to claim them as your own family heritage, how the belladonna and the torta could be useful if anyone ever challenged your ownership. There was no poisoned customer, no dead young mother. I created that story and paid a nurse to make that call, knowing it would frighten you into silence. The recipe you've been so afraid of all these years contains nothing more dangerous than gentian root. I disappeared because I had to, because I saw what greed was doing to both of you, my dearest friends. I couldn't bear to watch, and I knew you would never let me leave with my recipes, my legacy. I've lived a good life, Roberto. I've taught many young chefs, shared my love of true Italian cooking, and yes, I've even served the real torta della nonna to thousands of people over the years. None of them died, obviously. I forgave you long ago. I hope one day you can forgive yourself for what you intended to do, even if you didn't actually do it. Con affetto, with affection. Ariana ves fine Sofia. She has her nonna's same talent for pastry, and Ariana's eyes. The last line hit me like a physical blow. I read it again, then again. Ariana's eyes. I dug deeper into the box and found a faded photograph I'd never seen before. My grandmother and Ariana, arms linked, standing in front of the original restaurant. The resemblance between Ariana and my grandmother was striking. They could have been sisters, or something more. I returned to the hospital, the contents of the safe deposit box in my bag. My grandfather was asleep when I arrived, his breathing labored. I sat beside him, waiting, the pieces of a new family story arranging themselves in my mind. When he finally opened his eyes and saw me, he asked simply, "Did you find it?" I nodded, placing the letter on his blanket. "She's been dead for about 5 years, according to the obituary in Santa Fe. She lived a full life, grandfather. A good one." He read the letter slowly, his hands shaking more with each line. When he finished, tears were streaming down his weathered cheeks. "There's more, isn't there?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Something you figured out that isn't in the letter." I took out the photograph. Ariana and grandmother. They look very much alike. He closed his eyes. "Sisters," he confirmed. "Half-sisters, to be precise. Same father, different mothers. And they both loved you," I said softly. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "I chose Gianna, the legitimate daughter, the one whose family had connections. But Ariana," his voice broke. "Ariana was the one with the real talent, the passion for food, the creativity." "So the recipes really were family recipes after all," I said. "Just not the side of the family we thought." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Ariana would appreciate that irony. I sat with him through the night. We talked more than we ever had before. About Ariana, about my grandmother, about the restaurant and its beginnings, about my mother, who never knew any of this, and my sister, who deserved to hear the truth. "Why did you react so strongly at the wedding?" I asked as dawn broke outside his window. "If you thought the cake was poisoned, why not quietly dispose of it?" He looked ashamed. Panic. Fear. 60 years of guilt erupting at once. He reached for my hand. "And seeing you there, so proud of recreating the original recipe, you looked so much like her." For a moment, I thought Ariana had come back to expose me herself. 3 days later, he died peacefully in his sleep. I was the only family member present. The reconciliation with my sister and parents came slowly, painfully. The full story helped, not as an excuse, but as context for the explosion at the wedding. The fact that no one had actually been in danger made it easier for Elise to eventually forgive me. My mother struggled more with the revelation that her mother had had a half-sister she never knew about, a secret kept from her entire life. "Who else am I related to that I don't know about?" she asked once, not really expecting an answer. 6 months after my grandfather's death, I opened a small patisserie in the same neighborhood as the original family restaurant. I named it Ariana's and specialized in authentic Italian desserts, including a torta della nonna made exactly according to the recipe in the metal box. On opening day, as I arranged the display case, my sister appeared at the counter. She was visibly pregnant, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "We're naming her Ariana," she said after we embraced. "It seems right, somehow, to acknowledge all branches of the family tree." She helped me serve customers that first day. My parents came too, bringing flowers and a framed photograph of my grandfather in his original restaurant, the one I'd never seen before, where he stood flanked by both my grandmother and Ariana, all three young and smiling, full of hope and ambition. I hung it on the wall beside the original recipe for torta della nonna, finally displayed openly after decades hidden away. Beneath it, I placed the small metal recipe box that had started everything. Unlocked now, its contents available for anyone who cared to look. The secret ingredient, it turned out, had never been belladonna. It was never gentian root or cinchona bark either. It was the story behind the recipe, the love, the betrayal, the forgiveness. The complicated, messy truth of family. And the truth, once tasted, changes everything, like the perfect balance of bitter and sweet in a torta della nonna made with loving hands.